Now, let's kind of transition into our next story. That actually kind of brings us into our next point of, it pains me, honestly. You don't know how much my heart breaks whenever I hear of a failure of a pastor or of a ministry leader. And unfortunately, I hope that when we talk about ministry leaders, we won't always be talking about moral failings. It just happened that an article popped up in my in my view in my research this week, where I happened to come across that Pastor John Cameron, the senior pastor and founder of Arise Church, which is one of the largest churches in New Zealand. Sad to hear this report that there's an internal investigation against them. There's all this reported abuse, and I'll read the report. So New Zealand's largest mega church is being investigated by the country's Department of Internal Affairs following a damning report that the church commissioned but then refused to release. According to the 49-page report, there were egregious and systematic failures in the leadership of Arise Church. And it then went on to say that there was, in an independent review, that was conducted by Pathfinding, a Christian critical response management company, called for board resignations and new leadership to address widespread problems, including ill treatment of volunteers and interns enrolled in the Arise Ministry School. Now, Dr. Rod, obviously we spoke about this previously, and you voiced what you just voiced just then about the accountability. What is it that you think happened, or what was the fault or that led to this lack of accountability? Because they had a board, they had, what, didn't they have it, and how did this still happen?
You ask pretty tough questions, Craig.
That's why we've got you, Dr. Rod.
You do. You ask pretty tough questions. Look, can I just say first, I personally do know pastors of very large churches, some of the largest churches in Australia, and they're men of great integrity.
Yes.
And they have surrounded themselves with people who do hold them accountable.
Yeah.
I've also mentored the chair of the board of elders of a very large church. This one not a Pentecostal church, but one of the largest churches within that denominational stream. So I can say that it is possible to be the senior pastor of a very large church and do it well.
And I have to back up your I suppose disclaimer. Please, this is not a smear piece against Pastor John Cameron. My senior pastor, where we first met, was actually went through Bible college, has a good relationship with him and everything like that. And I know he is a good man. And I've met him a number of times and hung out with him and stuff like that. But please don't think that we're doing this as a smear campaign or anything like that. This is simply, I just wanted to take information from this public knowledge, and obviously not knowing all the situation, and just seeing what we can learn, how we can learn from other people's mistakes, not damning them or anything like that. So yes, it's a very good point, Dr. Rod. Sorry, keep going.
No, that's fine. Look, what this was leading to is that I do think that governance issues in the church world are very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Now, one reason is this: the senior pastor is both CEO and father, right?
Mm-hmm.
The senior pastor is meant to be the spiritual father of his or her congregation. Now, that kind of thing really doesn't exist in the corporate world, where the CEO, in a sense, is a very technical role.
Yes.
That's very different in churches.
Yeah.
So we have to be quite careful about simply importing a corporate model, like a business model, as it were, into the church world.
That's good.
I do believe that there are lots of dangers inherent in having the senior pastor chair the board of the church. Now, I do understand why that's done. And one of the reasons it's done is to protect the senior pastor from a rogue board.
Yes.
Right?
Which we've seen,
there are
it
lots
happens.
of examples
Yeah.
where pastors upset someone on the board and suddenly they're thrown out of their church.
Yeah.
And we don't want to see that either. That's just as bad as the kind of thing we've seen in the case of a Rise Church. My personal view, and I've been an observer for a long time, I have been on church boards as well, is that the senior pastor should not be the chair of the church board.
Yeah.
However, and this is probably going to be a bit controversial, I don't believe that the church board should have the power to sack the senior pastor.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with the board having the power to appoint the pastor, but I really do think there needs to be significant external advice or a significant role of the leadership, say, of the whole denomination or movement, as we often call the Pentecostal world.
Yeah.
They need to have a significant degree of involvement in the removal of a pastor. So it's very, very difficult.
Yeah.
The other thing is that a lot of senior pastors are senior pastors because they have quite a charismatic personality.
Yes.
Now, that is a plus, no doubt about it. That's a plus. But also charismatic personalities have their downside because they can become overly confident in their own ability to hear from God.
Yeah.
And we end up with what I call the superhero leader or the major general leader, who essentially, the model is, I hear from God, I'm the leader, you're my followers, everybody falls into line, and you serve the vision. And I think that's what leads to the kind of what is labelled as abuse of interns in the case of a Rise Church, where interns are not well paid and sometimes they're not paid at all. And they actually undertake a lot of quite menial tasks, which probably don't contribute very much to character formation and certainly don't contribute very much to their spiritual development and to their spiritual understanding, their biblical knowledge and so on. So that's something that I think we have to watch very, very carefully in the church world.
So
a senior part,
because that's, Pastor John Cameron, there was a quote that says, yeah, look, I'm responsible for allowing this culture of performance, right? And you mentioned about the interns doing medial tasks and everything like that. I remember when I had my sabbatical, I was just doing medial tasks as well. I was just happy to serve at the church. Now, how do you, because there is a place for just someone just having a servant heart, like I did, just having a servant heart, just pouring everything out because around a church, medial tasks just need to get done. You don't have a big staff. Like you've got the pastor and the assistant, and that's usually it in most churches. And the pastor's assistant probably works 1 day a week or something like that. And then we expect the pastor to do house visits and hospital visits and prepare the message and lead the teams and organize everything. And so there are things that do need to be done. And I must admit, I enjoyed just serving and just doing the cleaning up the yard and doing the simple things. But how do we, because obviously the church culture is very much around that serving and obviously serving the ultimate vision. How do we, number one, how do we in that culture manage ourselves to not, because most of those interns will be complaining now about abuse looking back, but in the moment they were probably praising the moment and saying it was an amazing time and whatever, because we kind of get ourselves caught up in that moment. How do we manage ourselves in that situation? And then how do we as leaders manage our team and prevent them from we still need the medial things done, but how do we stop taking advantage of people?
Well, you stop taking advantage of people. Look, I certainly don't object to an intern program involving some of those things, but it needs to be made explicit.
Yeah.
I've seen contracts for staff of churches where, Sunday you've got to be at church, you've got to do this, that, and the other, but it's not a paid day. Now, I don't even object to that necessarily. I'd like to see provision made to make sure that everybody in the church gets at least one day away from, the hustle and the bustle of the office and so on. So it's not really about whether or not people are paid, but I do think it's about whether or not there are reasonable expectations of people. The complaints that appear to have come out of the review of Arise Church really centre on the unreasonableness of what people were being expected to do. So it's important that everybody basically knows what is expected of them. So, I think if you're an intern, you can expect that you might be on toilet cleaning duty sometimes. As a pastor of a small church, it's my great privilege sometimes to unblock the one toilet that we have, right? And quite frankly, if I was a pastor of a large church, I probably would 2 or 3 times a year go and join the toilet cleaners and help them.
Yeah.
But obviously, that's not something I'm going to be able to do every Sunday or every day of the week because there are so many demands on your time. So you certainly can't do everything. But I think you do need to show that it's not beneath you, so to speak, to engage in some of those activities. So making sure that everybody knows what their role is, I think that's really quite important. Jesus was pretty explicit with his own disciples about what their role was.
Yeah. And
have a look in the book of Acts when there were some issues over the way in which the widows were being dealt with by the church, and the wisdom was that we appoint certain people to look after that aspect of the church's activities, while those who were called into the role of apostles actually got on with being apostles and spreading the truth of the message of the gospel and so on. So I think that's important. But what we've got to understand something, I think, neighbour love means that we have to treat everybody with great care, respect and affection, especially those who have said we want to serve, because they are quite vulnerable. And I don't know whether I can say a lot more than that, because every church's situation is going to be different. I know in my own church, ever since the day we planted our church in 2016, we've said every volunteer will be rostered off one Sunday.
Yeah. So
they'll only ever be rostered on 3 Sundays out of 4, or maybe 4 if there are 5 Sundays in the month. Now, I mean, my hope is that they'll still choose to come to church, but my expectation is that when they're at church, they won't have to actually do anything.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a pretty good principle to employ in most church situations. And sometimes as pastor, you need to say to people, stop volunteering.
Yes. Yes. You need to manage their energy.
You need to manage their enthusiasm as well. And it's important for leaders sometimes to recognise that the people around them are burning themselves out because they are so committed either to the vision or to you personally as the pastor. And you need to say, no, I'm telling you, now is the time to take a little break.
Yeah.
And as a pastor and as someone who's fairly active within the wider church community here on the Gold Coast, my wife and I have made a commitment to ourselves that we won't allow ourselves to burn out. We're planning an overseas trip in May next year. It's a little while to go. We're also planning a short break in November. So that's in our schedule. We're not accepting commitments in that time. So we expect our people to organise their lives that way, but we also have to discipline ourselves to do the same thing, because the people who are our followers will follow our leadership.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't take time off, they won't take time off. So
good.
It is really important that we live what we preach, as it were, in this context.
Yeah, I think that part of the report, or actually the advisors then came in and said how they're going to try to fix this performance culture, is as they said they were obviously more focused on the mission of Arise rather than the mission of Jesus. And they said, we need more discipleship. And I think that that's the key to be overcoming that performance culture is, yes, you can have the team working on those medial tasks, but are you then also spending the time to invest in that team to help them grow? It's kind of the core of OnPurposeCUBED, our leadership development program. Shameless little plug there. It's completely free, faith-based leadership development program. Check the link below. It'll be somewhere. But it all based around you need to be helping someone else grow. And you need to help someone while they're helping you mop the floors or empty the bins or whatever. Those things still need to get done, but are we helping them discover their own purpose and helping them thrive and helping them grow? Because if we're just using them and, we unintentionally using and abusing them, that's the way it'll be interpreted. But if we are, okay, they're investing a little bit, I'm going to invest more into them, then they can grow, become better, and over time, they can learn their purpose. They can grow into their position, into whatever position they are in the church, rather than just doing tasks. They can come and serve our vision, but we need to also help serve their vision, help them discover what their vision is and help their purpose and calling, and then help them rise into that. And so I think that that's part of our role as leaders to avoid that, especially like what, John Cameron had faced there with the over abuse and this drive forward of growing the organization. They forgot about growing people. And so we as leaders have to remember we need to grow the people around us, not the buildings around us, not the tasks, not the accolade. No, we need to grow the people. You've watched a quick excerpt. Well, actually, we know we talk a little bit, so it's not that quick. But you've watched an excerpt from our weekly live full episode of On the Cube Leadership Podcast. If you want to see what more you can learn to become a better leader from pop culture, from business, from politics, from ministry leadership, and from the Bible, we encourage you, hit the subscribe button and join us as we continue to share more and more information like this so that you can become a better leader that learns, lives, and leads on purpose.